So let's talk about Bremont and my feelings about the brand. Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville. A couple of weeks ago I did a Ask Me Anything call for questions. I answered all of them in one long 1.5 hour block, and my idea was to just slice and dice that into little 20-minute segments. That didn't work because when I sat down to edit, the last 20 minutes was just awful and unusable. I was clearly brain fried by that stage. So what I'm going to do is answer those questions in little bite-sized chunks now. The first question of those I'm going to address is, what's my feeling about Bremont? I can see where that comes from. Bremont are a brand which inspires really strong feelings, and your position on Bremont kind of marks you out as what kind of collector you are, which is interesting because I don't really have a position on Bremont. On one hand, they should be my brand. I'm in the military. I'm an engineer. I value case manufacture, engineering and design a bit more than I care about movement design, particularly your basic three-hander workhorse movement. I'm not really that interested in how well or badly you do that. And I'm perfectly happy with buying in third-party movements. So from that point of view, Bremont is my brand. Military-inspired, relationships with armed forces, very tool-focused, very design-focused, very engineering-focused, and they rely very heavily on in-house movements. Like I said, they should be my brand. And I do really kind of like their watches, and I am kind of warm to them, but I'm probably not enough to spend the money they ask for because they are not cheap watches. So let's talk very quickly about why I have this kind of ambivalence, but also I'll touch on why, while I think they are expensive, I don't think they are unrealistically so, and that I don't think that they're ripping people off, which I think is often a claim made in the forums. But let's back it up first. So why can't I really warm to them or really attach myself to Bremont? Fundamentally, it's because it's you can kind of see how hard they're forcing that brand. I think like a lot of people, and I think this is a general feeling, we like the idea that a brand grows organically. Maybe divers dive with it and make a film, and then it grows, or pilots fly with it, and then we hear later about pilots flying with it, and so forth. This kind of organic growth, that's frankly, for a mechanical watch in the 21st century, that's impossible because no one uses watches that way. The only way you can get out now, the only way you can create a story at all to sell a new watch or a new brand is via marketing. And if you want to do that quickly, which Bremont has done, they have done this extremely quickly, you have to work really, really, really hard to get those stories, to make those stories, and then to get them out. And I think Bremont, in their haste to grow, in their haste to expand, I mean, for God's sake, they're only a couple of years old and they've already got a boutique in Melbourne. There are Swiss companies been around for 100 years that don't have boutiques in my city. To really drive it that hard, frankly, you've got to force feed this animal. You've got to be forcing that food in, and I think for me, and probably for a whole bunch of other people, watching that process, watching that force feeding is a little bit off-putting. Some people are totally negative on it. I would often be. I'll cut them a little bit of slack only on the basis that I kind of understand if you want to grow fast, that's what you got to do. So I wouldn't put myself in the hater camp, but I can't love the company because it just feels like, the wizard behind the curtain is just a little bit too easy to see. As I said, the stories are a little bit too forced, a little bit too artificial, confected, contrived, and I just can't latch onto them. On the point of pricing, I think Bremonts are expensive, but I don't think that they are unrealistically so. I think that, I realise that's probably a controversial position. That's probably not most people's reaction. Where I'm coming from is it's about where you see value and what is value to you. As I've said earlier, I don't get much sense of value from a company developing an in-house movement that's a basic workhorse three-hander. I don't think that in the 21st century that's a particularly notable thing. I don't think it's a mark of being a watchmaker. People have known how to do this for a long, long time. It's not particularly difficult. If you've got the money, you can just throw the job at pretty much any competent bunch of engineers and workmakers and watchmakers and crank the handle, and in a couple of years you'll have an in-house movement. It's not, for me, the ability to do that is not a sign of a watchmaker. It's just a sign of someone who's got a lot of money to spend. Conversely, really interesting design, really interesting engineering, really interesting cases and materials and finishes. You can't just crank the handle on that. You've got to actually apply a lot of thought to it. And I value that. I'm happy to pay for that. So that's why I kind of don't think that Bremonts are overly expensive. It's very similar to my thoughts about, say, Bell & Ross, that it's not about whether there is value in the watches, it's about whether you value or I value what is in the watches. So if you value an in-house movement, if you really think that having that workhorse movement come from the name on the front of the watch, then there isn't value for you in a Bremont. If, like me, you don't value that in-house movement, but you value that really clever triptych case, then, or as I said for Bell & Ross, that really cunning and stunningly designed square case they do, then there's no issue with pricing. They are worth the money. And so that's why maybe that you take those two things together, I don't feel I'm being ripped off if I was to buy a Bremont. Conversely, I don't quite buy the story just yet. Leaves me feeling a bit about the brand. I like their watches, but I like their watches. I don't mind the brand, but I don't love any of it enough to spend the money required. Anyway, so that's my position on Bremont. It's surprisingly lukewarm, I suppose. But I thought, you know what, we tend to spend a lot of time talking about the things that we're super passionate about. And maybe I thought the idea of exploring the idea of something I was a bit meh about was kind of interesting. Anyway, I'll get on to some of your questions in other videos coming up shortly. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches. Do hit the like and subscribe button if you enjoyed this and you want to see more, and I'll see you later. Bye.